This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. Get access to CuriosityStream and my streaming service Nebula when you sign up at curiositystream.com/SarahZ.
I had a good day of tips waitressing for once, so I gave a homeless man $20 on the walk home.
There must be a mistake.
No mistake, I can afford to cut back a little. Have a wonderful day. Suddenly, a shrieky little voice rang out. A pasty dude wearing a trench coat and fedora barreled towards me.
What the fuck are you doing?
He yanked the $20 bill from the homeless man's grip. Slicing his fingers on the paper, he stuffed the bloody bill in my face.
No, you worked for this money while he sat on his ass and jerked off. You keep it.
He threw the money in my face. What the fuck is your problem, asshole?
Listen to me, you fucking useless female. I'm from New York City, where the homeless have the decency to try and work for money, whether it's shining your shoes, cleaning your windshield, or just doing a little dance on the street corner. I once saw a man with one leg hop in a circle for hours and made $6 in change. That's the difference between a classy homeless person and a bum.
Well, this is my money. I earned it, I'll use it any way I like. How do you get your money if you're so important?
I don't need a job because my mom gives me money.
A crowd had formed. Everyone was glaring at the scumbag, and a few were even cheering me on.
You wanna dance, you little prick?
Everyone turned to see the homeless man racing to his feet. To our amazement, he began to perform a pitch-perfect Korean-style dance.
Oppa homeless style!
The crowd erupted. We all began to join in the dance, save for Dipshit, who turned bright purple. Up, the homeless style! I threw my $20 at the homeless man's feet. Everyone else followed suit, tossing money at him. A woman in a suit gave him her gold watch. Dipshit took off running while the rest of us danced into the night.
If there's one thing more quintessentially Tumblr than Kickstarter scams and buck-wild catfishing controversies, it's fake posts. Subreddits like r/thathappened that are devoted to finding and calling out made-up internet stories are constantly sharing screenshots from Tumblr, and fake stories like this one made up by an anti-social justice blog who invented a bus full of trans people with matching t-shirts who go around beating cis people up have frequently become memes in and of themselves. I mean, mind you, fake internet stories are a thing everywhere. They're big on Reddit too, and basically everyone knows that like 90% of the stuff on the relationships forum or Am I the Asshole are complete nonsense. Fake stories are fairly big on Twitter too. One common thread is people lying about their kids saying really profound stuff, to the extent that it's become a popular meme to parody these stories by having fictional kids say increasingly ridiculous things. But Tumblr's fake stories seem to have a particularly outlandish nature to them. It's not just, haha, my kid said some profound nonsense about wolves. It's like, we danced to Gangnam Style into the night, and I met a cop and we're reading Homestuck together under a shock blanket. And so Tumblr in particular has become really famous for these hilariously made-up stories. This tends to happen for a couple reasons, and the first is that Tumblr is kind of a lawless wasteland, and I mean that in the best way possible. The website has virtually no moderation compared to, say, Reddit, because it's not made up of a bunch of tiny sub-communities with their own moderators. There are teams of people who review posts that get reported, but you do have to report a post for them to spot it. They won't see it on their own. And while a moderator of, say, a relationships subreddit might create their own rules and say obviously fake posts aren't allowed here, there's nothing in Tumblr's terms of service banning those. You see, they only ban very dangerous content like female presenting nipples. Even then, they're laughably horrible at enforcing their terms of service. So there's no one deleting these stories, and people are free to post basically anything unless it's horribly egregiously against the terms of service or it's a woman's body. And secondly, compared to Twitter, another site where you can mostly post whatever made-up bullshit you want, the site is a lot more versatile. There's no character limit, for example, and you can add as many photos to a post as you want, which means people can get a lot more creative with their fake stories than they can in, say, a Twitter post. Fake stories on Twitter tend to be short little anecdotes like, my kid said this, or this cool mom egged someone's car, which are dumb, but just not as memorable as the kind of narrative you can come up with when given unlimited text space. Another thing you'll notice when you look at most screenshots of fake Tumblr posts is what the screenshots actually look like. This Instagram account, Fake Stories Frick, basically just posts made-up stories they found online, and like 90% of them are Tumblr posts. And when you scroll, you'll notice that in almost every case, the posts have the little line next to them, even though Tumblr doesn't look like that anymore. So I'll talk more about this in a second, but that's because those posts are all screenshots taken before 2015, where they changed the format of their posts from this format with the lines to this much more clean and easy to read format. And that's because there was a very particular culture that Tumblr embodied prior to, I mean, I hate to always bring up DashCon, but you really can trace it to about DashCon times. Again, I'll talk more about this in a bit, but all of these factors combined make Tumblr a perfect breeding ground for absurd, funny, and easy to share and mock fake posts. But why are we here talking about this today? Well, that fake homeless story from earlier, Oppa homeless style, has become a staple of Tumblr meme culture for several years now, ever since it first became noticed on the website. But recently, someone discovered something about that story that made a lot of waves. What seemed like a simple fake tale by a bored teenager about Korean music and homelessness turned out to connect to a web of lies involving Reddit clout, years of deception, and very strong opinions on dog breeds. Let me explain. So the first time Oppa homeless style surfaced online was in the form of a screenshot posted onto Reddit on March 1st, 2014. I want to say right off the bat that the person involved in researching where this post came from was not me. That credit goes to Tumblr users Swordcats, Blueside Fan Club, and Heritage Posts. They were the people who went back to look at the profile of this person in the first place and find out where the story came from. The reason I'm making a video about this at all instead of just linking a post that someone else made is that I don't just want to recap the deal with Oppa homeless style, which you can easily find elsewhere, but rather look at why this happened and what it can tell us. So thank you to those three people for laying this foundation so that I can talk about the site culture of fake Tumblr stories and what it says about living in a society. Okay, so almost exactly 7 years ago, Reddit user MechaMew2 posts Oppa homeless style. The thread, titled "Fedora Villain Shames Woman for Giving to the Homeless," gets 3,500 upvotes, and the mods give it a quality post flair. The top comment speculates as to whether someone wrote the post just to put it on Reddit and debunk it. Someone points out that even if that were true, 145 people still believed it and shared it unironically. Other comments are mainly making fun of our protagonist in the Oppa homeless style story. Comments poking holes in the woman's story, praising the person who posted it with comments like "this is the greatest thing I've ever seen," and emphasizing how baloney the story is make up the 435 comments on the post. It doesn't take long for the screenshot itself to be shared to Tumblr, with people making fun of it on there as well. Oppa homeless style very quickly became a meme on Tumblr, and unlike a lot of other memes, it had incredible staying power. In 2016, Tumblr user BeetleDrink, or Kramergate at the time, made a post full of links to their favorite fake Tumblr posts and shared the Oppa homeless style screenshot onto Tumblr, where it got 80,000 likes, comments, and reblogs. Lots of people once again expressed that it was their favorite fake Tumblr story of all time because of how hilariously made up it is. Like, the author seems almost comically detached from reality. Not just because the actual prose sounds like the kind of approximation of human speech you'd get by training a neural network solely on poorly translated anime fan subs, but also because of the absolute brazenness it takes to post it, tag it with things like fedorable and poverty, and fully expect people to believe it.
Come on, we're talking a gold piece here. Let's see some action. Dance!
And given the 145 likes and shares in the screenshot, people did. It's over the top in a great way, and it's perfectly representative of what the incredible era of fake Tumblr posts used to look like. And I think it's reasonable to say Oppa homeless style got far more popular on Tumblr than it did on the original Reddit post designed to mock it. It got way more comments and shares on Tumblr, and way more people were inclined to believe it was an actual fake story someone made up and not something someone made a fake account to post and share on Reddit for clout. So why is that? Well, in order to look into Oppa homeless style, it's important to look at the general culture of fake Tumblr posts. As said earlier, Tumblr is not the first or only place that fake stories online got circulated. They obviously existed as early as the internet first existed because people like to make shit up, whether it's for fun, attention, boredom, or to affect people's opinions on something.
You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies?
I mean, the episode that Arthur clip is from 2005. The earliest I remember realizing things on the internet were fake was on this website, My Life is Average. It was originally a spin-off of the website F My Life, or FML, which was like the web version of the embarrassing moments section in a teen magazine. People would share anecdotes about awful things happening to them. It's technically still around now, though not a lot of people use it, but at its height, posts could get hundreds of thousands or even millions of reactions on them. These posts, once again, very quickly devolved into the realm of fake. The top post of all time on there is from 2009, and it's, again, clearly not real. Like, yeah, the first part is maybe plausible, but the second part, no human talks like that. If you accidentally sent a text to the wrong person, you don't use their name in an awkwardly stilted way. It's obviously made up. Just looking at the top posts on there, most of them are doubtful. Anyway, eventually 2 university students who read FML realized that these were getting ridiculously over the top and made My Life is Average, or MLIA, in 2009. At first, the stories were designed to be incredibly boring, like that was the whole joke. Instead of sharing over-the-top stories, it was mundane average stuff, like, today I put my hands under the sink and then it didn't work, so I realized there was no motion sensor. Just boring stuff like that. There was an average word of the day that was literally just a boring word everyone knew. But the site started to take on a cultural shift quite quickly. First, people would start posting random humorous observations and tacking MLIA onto the end, and then, well, it got turned into something very different from its original intention. First, people started sharing posts about more cool things that happened to them. Like, oh, this Justin Bieber fan really got dunked on. And then people started talking about fandom stuff as it related to their lives, especially Harry Potter. And it very quickly became a den of over-the-top fandom stories, still using the label MLIA. Like, compare this front page from 2009 to this front page from 2011. It also spawned spin-offs like My Life is Twilight, which is exactly what you'd think. I remember very quickly a culture sprung up around MLIA where people in the comments would decry how MLIA was no longer average and would belittle all the stories posted onto there. I remember eventually the same 30 people would comment on everything, and eventually people stopped talking about the stories and just used the comment section as a place to hang out and shoot the shit. It was the first real internet community that I ever really participated in, and it sprung up from making fun of fake stories on a spin-off of a forum for fake stories. There was someone called the Batting Fairy who would downvote every single comment, and they were sort of a meme. There was someone who would do an angry rant about any subject you asked them to, and there were even spin-off Facebook groups where people would add each other and become friends IRL. If any of y'all hung out on MLIA in 2009-ish and remember hanging out with someone named Flying_Turtle_Festival, y'all are my brethren and I'll always remember you. K Winchester, Mobile, Ocean, something or the other. Hope y'all are doing well. There was also Not Always Right and its related websites, which again started as a space to share stories about customers being the worst. A very relatable and true-to-life experience, but quickly evolved into comically fake stories and even got published into a book, which I actually purchased. I know some of these were fake because their FAQ claimed it met a rigorous standard for fact-checking because people kept trying to submit Family Guy scenes. So when I was 12, I wrote an obviously fake Star Wars story to see if it would get through, and they posted it, and it's still up there to this day. Another great one pre-2011 was Troper Tales, a part of TV Tropes where people who used the website would post stories about their lives that were insanely comically fake, and yet always seemed to be believed by the people who used the website. If you try to go on the TV Tropes page now, they say it was found to be unmanageable and has been permanently removed from the wiki, and yeah, they're right. A lot of them featured bullies being owned by nerds via facts and logic and also karate skills. Here's one where 2 teenage girls scare off a mugger by using big words and poking him with an umbrella. The Badass Boasts page is a goldmine. It's just people talking about how they scared off bank robbers or whatever with anime villain monologues. Also lots of weird sex stories, just so many. This place was a cesspit. Anyway, in 2011, it ended up getting shut down after a divisive website vote, which is probably for the best, but it does mean we lost a goldmine of content. Anyway, all of this nonsense existed before Tumblr, and certainly before any of these examples that I'm talking about popped up. But much like some of these websites of yore, pre-Dashcon Tumblr had a very specific site culture to it. Much like how MLIA thrived on quirky fandom stories and Troper Tales thrived on unassuming nerds being BBC Sherlock-esque badasses by virtue of their nerdiness, Tumblr fake stories had a few common threads that gave them a distinct kind of Tumblrness. The first is that back in the day pre-2015, they were incredibly pervasive and rarely went challenged by most of fandom Tumblr. I think this is largely just that the people writing and sharing these fake stories were very young. A lot of them seem to reference a kind of adult life that most fandom Tumblr users sharing these posts at the time were not super well versed in yet. There's this one clearly written by and for people who know nothing about drugs, in which someone puts weed in the school vents and the whole school gets high. Obvious bullshit to anyone over the age of 15, but if all you know about weed is from school assemblies and music videos, you might be like, yeah, I believe this. Or this one where a girl gets called for jury duty and she pretends the Bible burns her and a lady faints. Again, might be believable only to a kid who's never been to one. Or like, look at the one I referenced earlier where someone found out Homestuck updated, so they went outside and started screaming, as one does. And someone called the cops, and then the cop was like, oh my god, Homestuck updated. So we put on a shock blanket and they started reading Homestuck together. Listen, pigs in a blanket are delicious, but this story is obviously not going to be plausible to anyone who has met a cop for more than 5 minutes or who has had an adult job in general, but it's just the right amount of quirkiness to appeal to a suburban white 14-year-old who got the general idea of cops and shock blankets from Sherlock and likes Homestuck. Another theme in a lot of Tumblr fake stories was finding out that adults in your life secretly share the same nerdy interests as you, like your teacher using Tumblr code words or making Doctor Who references on your tests, or finding out your parents or grandparents are obsessed with the same ships as you. Another common thread was protagonists who would effortlessly dunk on rude people around them, often with everyone clapping at the display of heroics before them. These ones would typically vaguely reference progressive politics. There's this one where someone's homophobic dad learns to stop being homophobic because he ships John and Sherlock. Or this one where a girl effortlessly shuts down a guy complaining about the friend zone. Or this one where a girl goes to Disneyland and is mocked for her weight by an army of children until the girl playing Ariel tells them it's a drownable offense. Or one where a cop who talks like she's from a bad 80s movie arrests a guy harassing a girl on the train. One where a movie bimbo is harassing a fat girl at the gym and gets epically dunked on. Or this one with, God, amazing dialogue. This Gamzee cosplayer teams up with a brony who's attacking girls for their weight and gets stopped by a Japanese man in a Ryu cosplay who speaks Japanese to them, tells them they dishonor themselves, and asks out our protagonist. This one really exemplifies the spirit of early Tumblr because there's both the veneer of progressivism in terms of standing up against body shaming, but also this really weird racist stereotyping of what the writer seems to think Japanese people are like. Very early Tumblr. There's also this one where a guy is being homophobic, so she goes up and tells him it's okay and he needs to accept himself and come out, and he starts crying and saying how hard it is. There's the progressive aesthetic, but a kind of reactionary sentiment behind it. Generally speaking, a sassy protagonist who always has the right comeback, publicly humiliating a bigot of some sort, is really the bread and butter of these stories. So there's the fandom-y nature of them, there's the liberal-ish politics, and there's also the vague representation of what the world looks like, often from the eyes of a very young teenager. Ultimately, these stories were often fantasies for nerdy suburban kids who had a general approximation of how the world works and mostly went unchallenged. These stories were really prevalent on Tumblr for a few years. This culture eventually started to shift, and there was this kind of backlash where people would comment postbusters on fake posts. By 2014, 2015, people started to get older and more critical of these early fandom posts, and a general sense of disillusionment with fandom culture also soured people on them. Again, I think Dashcon, while not the entire cause of this increased critical cynicism, definitely had an effect. The rising prevalence of cringe culture also started to kick in. People lost interest in fandom stuff, which is normal, but started to get deeply, deeply embarrassed with their past selves and with anyone still involved in those interests. So there was this intense culture of mockery surrounding fandom nerds springing up from about 2014 to present day, and so a lot of these fake posts were kind of collateral damage in that. That said, there were equally fake posts making fun of Tumblr fandom nerd types. Like this old blog, Say No to Super Hulock, which is a blog titled You're a Nerd and was all about how terrible Super Hulock was, made up a post about a girl who wrote an essay on John Locke and published a fake post on Tumblr saying her teacher said I ship it, when in actuality the teacher gave her an F and wrote see me. Like, this is obviously a fake post written to make Tumblr nerds look bad, and the people who run the blog have since admitted they think it was fake. But it's just great though, a teenager making a fake post about another teenager making a fake post. It's incredible. My point being, while the anti-fandom Tumblr cringe backlash led to a lot of people beginning to mock and discredit fake posts, they didn't go away. They did definitely decrease in their frequency and absurdity though. People still tried to make things up, but blatantly fake stories usually didn't gain the kind of universal acclaim that they did back in 2012. Don't get me wrong, people still share made up bullshit, but it's usually not this over-the-top, obviously fake Tumblr content. These days, it's often just cross-referenced screenshots from Reddit. Like, this one got big on Tumblr, this stereotypical country mama who saves her gay son after her ex-husband kicks him out of the home. It starts as a wholesome, believable story, and then the author keeps upping the stakes until it's very clearly a feel-good fictional narrative. She emphasizes how she's just a simple country lady who doesn't know much about what she's talking about, and then she's suddenly making well-drawn, edited cat memes popular with 20-something-year-old gamers about her own life, as one does, with the precision of a longtime Reddit user, and then the husband was cheating on her all along and she makes him cry for hours, and then she comes out as bisexual herself and deletes her account, and you're like, yeah, okay. Anyway, that one's less than a year old and got over 200,000 likes and reblogs on Tumblr. And some people are calling bullshit, but a lot of people are talking about it like a wholesome, feel-good story. That kind of stuff still gets shared and believed on sites like Tumblr and Reddit. But for the most part, while more tame fake stories that reaffirm people's beliefs still get shared occasionally, the cartoonishly obvious fake content a la Oppa homeless style is generally mocked. Like, there was this one from 2017 where a 39-year-old woman is minding her own business and gets accosted by a teenager for shipping Raylo, and then her mom screams at her and buys the woman a crepe to apologize. And that one got a little bit of sympathy, but it very, very quickly became a meme with thousands of people mocking this lady for her obviously fake post. Posts like that just don't get automatically trusted the way they used to. Or the one I mentioned earlier, Down with Cis, featured a cis guy and his friend minding their own business, and then a bus full of trans people wearing matching shirts beat him up and sent them to the hospital. That one was mocked by basically everyone who saw it. So for the most part, as people got older and wiser and also more likely to cringe at earnest fandom content, Tumblr's culture definitely shifted from believing these absurdly fake posts to delighting in mocking them. And that's largely why Oppa homeless style was such a fun meme for people. It's emblematic of basically every trope to do with fake Tumblr posts. It's divorced from an adult understanding of how the world works, but would fit perfectly into a kid's cartoon. There's the ostensibly progressive but still weird politics, and it's about a cartoonishly evil villain getting upstaged by a cool protagonist who the entire crowd supports. It's like machine generated to be the perfect Tumblr story, and a now grown-up base of Tumblr users who enjoy mocking those stories and recognize similar ones from their youth latched onto it. People had a lot of fun with Oppa homeless style, and it's reasonable, given what Tumblr's culture was like for years, that Tumblr users were able to accept it as something that a Tumblr user could reasonably post. But then it all came crashing down. About 8 months ago, a new Tumblr famous blog hopped onto the scene. I mentioned them briefly in my DashCon video as well as earlier on in this video, but Heritage Posts is a blog dedicated to finding and chronicling old embarrassing Tumblr posts from ye olden days. Usually these are ones that were really popular at the time and often got screenshotted and passed around a lot, but got lost to time for various reasons. It's a very fun blog to check out and a neat time capsule into what Tumblr culture was like in 2012. Anyway, they started a fake stories tag with lots of fake tales from ye olden days, most of which, again, fit the MO of fake Tumblr tales. And then they started looking for the original Oppa homeless style post, not the Reddit screenshot, but the actual Oppa homeless style post as it originally read on Tumblr, only to discover that they couldn't find it. The original blog seemed to no longer be present, and despite it having over 100 likes and reblogs, it didn't seem to be available on anyone else's blog either. Suspecting that maybe Oppa homeless style was never a real Tumblr post, they put out a call to figure out the actual deal with the post. After a lot of searching, the 2 Tumblr users previously mentioned in my video did some digging, and it turns out there's no indication that the phrase Oppa homeless style ever appeared on the internet before Mecha Mewtwo posted that Reddit screenshot. And that led people to go through Mecha Mewtwo's posting history, and what they found was super interesting. A whole bunch of those fake Tumblr stories I told you about earlier were also posted to Reddit specifically from this guy's account. The one about the fat girl going to the gym and being mocked by a skinny antagonist and saved by a hot gym guy, this guy posted that screenshot. The one about the fat girl going to a convention and being mocked by a brony antagonist and being saved by a hot Japanese cosplayer, he posted that one too. The one about the fat girl going to Disneyland and being mocked by a ride operator and being saved by a hot Disney princess, also a Mecha Mew original. I assume you're getting the common theme here. The one about the girl putting her hand on the Bible and making a lady faint, that one is also from him, which obviously made people very curious because it really seems like this guy is exceptionally good at finding over-the-top Tumblr posts that don't seem to exist anywhere else. So people started searching for the original sources for these Tumblr posts and quickly came to find that none of them existed before Mecha Mew's screenshots. And I don't even mean like this guy having a bunch of alternate Tumblr accounts that he would use to post fake stories Toby style. I mean the screenshots themselves are all entirely fake. Looking through Mecha Mew's post history, it seems finally 1 month ago someone called him out on his bullshit, causing him to say that he just wanted to make people laugh and seemingly abandoning his account. It's worth mentioning that now he seems aggressively obsessed with pit bulls, sharing regular Facebook screenshots of pit bull owners being obnoxious or dangerous or irresponsible. It's not a massive stretch of the imagination to figure that, much like everything else Mecha Mew posted, these are fake. Is it possible that the only motivation here is maybe attention and maybe to create funny content as he says? Technically, yes. But looking at this account, it seems as though something else entirely is at play here. Something more sinister than just a funny tale of a homeless guy doing a pitch-perfect Korean dance. First of all, it's disturbing how much of Mecha Mew's content focuses on fat people, or more specifically, fat women. Tons of his fake posts are specifically written from the perspective of a fat woman who gets accosted by a cartoon antagonist, no doubt in an attempt to make us think of all the fat women protagonists as hysterical liars inventing discrimination for themselves. Like, this guy wrote an insane amount of fake posts that we're supposed to believe came from hysterical fat women. I actually decided to go back and count his original posts, and he made no less than 23 fake screenshots purporting to be from fat women. Keep in mind that these took effort to doctor. Like, look at this one, which is, again, a story about a fat woman going into a restaurant and being cartoonishly shamed for it. That took time to write and come up with, and he made dozens of these. Even if we're meant to believe there was no intentional political motivation behind these, which is very doubtful, the intense fixation on making fat women look bad is pretty disturbing. Other groups that Mecha Mew seemed to want to make look bad generally seemed to be anyone focused on social justice. A lot of these posts seemed to be about cartoon approximations of bigots showing up and saying racist or sexist things and then getting dunked on. Again, the liar in the fake post is basically always the one calling out the racism. We're meant to reinforce the idea in our heads that there's a plague of people lying about experiencing racism online in laughably false ways. Or there's this one where a woman is experiencing harassment on a bus and her cool lesbian friend steps in and saves the day. Again, these people are supposed to look bad for making up this fake story. He also seemed to really dislike atheists. A lot of his fake screenshots involved specifically making atheists look bad, whether it's the Bible one or this one where an atheist is volunteering and a Christian woman accosts her for no reason. He also participated in a parody subreddit designed to make fun of Reddit atheists, and so making fake atheists to dunk on seemed to be an extension of that. Even the ones that aren't trying to make anti-racist people of color, feminist women, and gay people specifically look bad still have to include some digs at fat people. This one features a racist woman falsely claiming to be kicked out of a store for being white, and even then there's this reference to giving her child Big Macs as a snack. This one that seems to be making fun of fake pro-life stories is the only fake story I could find that wasn't a dig on leftists or atheists or fat people of some kind. These were also just weirdly high effort in general. This dude posted a lot on anti-social justice warrior subreddits like Tumblr in Action, and this included stuff like making entire comics and drawings and claiming social justice warriors made them. Like in late 2013, he posted this comic here and claimed it had 300 likes on a Facebook group. So I searched it up and it doesn't fucking exist anywhere on the internet. The worst part is all the comments are accurately identifying how this person looks exactly like the internet's stereotype of a social justice warrior. And like there's literally a troll face on their bag, and yet en masse they aren't making the obvious connection that this isn't real. Or this one, like, do you seriously believe a fat person made this? Are you this absurdly desperate to have your preconceived views reinforced that you can't exercise an iota of critical thinking skills? For this one, he had to straight up write an entire poem in order to make a fake fat woman look bad. This guy put probably hours of real effort into doctoring fake screenshots of social justice warriors doing various crap, and the motivation is very clearly to make those groups look worse. Honestly, Oppa Homeless Style was one of the least egregious Mecha Mew originals, which is probably why it got so popular. But even the more innocent stuff, like the Bible one, he added this fake moment where someone awkwardly insisted that women could troll. Why? What's the purpose of that comment? Well, it makes the person leaving it look foolish and gullible. It makes the feminist statement look foolish. That's the purpose. So, okay. A large volume of cringe content featuring social justice warriors or whatever marginalized group it's cool to hate on comes from just this one guy. I think it's doubtful that he was just following the clout and doing it for attention, given his participation in communities devoted solely to making fun of fat people or SJWs or banning pit bulls, even outside of his posting fake stories about those groups. No, this was at least partly a concerted effort to make those groups look bad. When I was reading that original post about how Oppa Homeless Style was fake, a lot of folks in the comments noticed that this is how a lot of anti-social justice rhetoric has always seemed to operate, finding a bunch of edge cases that may not even be real and overblowing their danger. And that made me think a little bit about this Mecha Mew guy and what his internet presence can tell us about the formation of these communities in general. Note that I do not particularly care about this guy as a person beyond what he represents, but I think what he represents is interesting. Alright, so let me pivot for a second and talk about the skeptic community on YouTube and its pivot to anti-SJW rhetoric. I promise this is relevant, and especially so because Mecha Mew 2 spent a lot of time posting his fake content on r/Tumblr in Action, which was the entry point for a lot of people to making fun of social justice warriors. Despite the name, it also posted screenshots from Facebook and other social media platforms, but it was ostensibly primarily focused on Tumblr. I say was, there are currently just under 500,000 people subscribed to the forum, and at its height it had multiple posts getting over 30,000 upvotes. It peaked about 4 years ago when most of its highly voted posts were made, and it accompanied a bunch of YouTube channels that were largely focused on the social justice culture war. A lot of these channels were originally members of the internet skeptic community, an online community of atheists largely focused on dunking on random religious, usually Christian fundamentalists, and pivoted around 2013 to 2016 to anti-social justice warrior content. Usually this took the form of opposing feminism and trans activism that they perceived as going too far, are, but there was also a lot of mockery of hysterical people of color, fat people, disabled people, and cis queer people. Channels like Thunderfoot, The Amazing Atheist, Repsion, and generally the contingent of folks way too fixated on hating furries given their own anthropomorphic rant-sonas were foundational to a lot of this transition. Okay, so a lot of folks have already analyzed the rise and fall of the internet skeptic community and the association with the anti-social justice warrior movement. One particularly great video on the topic is by Big Joel, and it basically analyzes a very specific moment in anti-social justice warrior history. Right-wing blogger Blair White releases a video where she claims that many of her right-wing colleagues are just grifters in it for the clout. As someone who has sincerely held conservative beliefs, Blair finds it objectionable that she's literally had the experience of being on a talk show with someone and having her co-stars flat out say to her face that they don't actually care about the topics they're about to discuss, but that they're about to make a big act of it for television. What was interesting to Big Joel is that people more or less believed Blair, but that claim didn't make much of an impact on the anti-social justice warrior community. People agreed that many of their favorite YouTubers were grifters, but didn't seem to care much. Joel traces this specifically to the rise of dunking culture in the skeptic community. Basically, a lot of the YouTube atheist community in ye olden days was built around dunking on dumb Christian posts and poking holes in random arguments. Sometimes this wasn't a bad thing, like when critiquing religious homophobia, but it does seem like people cared more about the epic owns than they did about the actual homophobia, and a lot of the time it was largely just about establishing a community around those critiques. It wasn't really about engaging with these folks except to lob sick dunks at them. The critique wasn't for them, it was for the enjoyment of other similarly minded people that had built a community of sorts around it. And then that exact same mentality was applied to pop social justice, especially in the culture surrounding manspreading and BuzzFeed feminism and Anita Sarkeesian's general existence. Every single person who saw that BuzzFeed video on manspreading had the exact same obvious refutation and just repeated it to themselves over and over again, quickly treating the general body of SJWs in the same way they had treated the general body of Christianity. The arguments they're debunking tend to exist not really as a body of work to be seriously engaged with, but as, in Joel's words, props to disagree with. Hence, when it comes out that a lot of these beliefs on a lot of people's parts aren't sincerely held, it doesn't really matter because the important thing in those communities isn't really the beliefs themselves so much as just the aesthetics of dunking on an unreasonable set of arguments. I think this is more or less accurate, it's a great video, check it out. That said, I don't think this is the only reason the skeptic community took a turn into right-wing content. I think this video accurately traces the similarities between the MOs of both communities, but not specifically why feminism was the new target of these communities. A lot of that also came out of a rising discontentment with marginalized groups in the skeptic community, who began to critique some of the primary figures and were met with a very intense backlash. This is especially the case with Elevator Gate, where in 2011, a few years before the whole anti-manspreading backlash thing happened, prominent atheist figure and feminist Rebecca Watson made a video talking about a guy at a skeptic convention following her from a bar to an elevator at 4 a.m. and propositioning her while in the elevator, and how she felt uncomfortable with being asked out in a trapped space in a foreign country at 4 a.m. by a guy who followed her.
I don't really know how else to explain how this makes me incredibly uncomfortable, but I'll just sort of lay it out that I was a single woman, you know, in a foreign country at 4 a.m. in a hotel elevator with you.
It wasn't even a video about that, it was just an aside in a vlog. And by God, did the atheist community rain, ironically, hellfire onto her. The dislike ratio on that video is massive. Richard Dawkins made a blog post about how women in Muslim countries have it worse and it was insulting to them to bring up her experiences, and she received massive amounts of hate letters and threats for her video. A lot of marginalized folks ended up leaving the skeptic community largely because of the way Rebecca Watson and other marginalized people who critiqued the community were treated, leaving behind only the people who were not great to her. Elevator Gate was a divisive moment in the overall skeptic community and showed a general defensiveness and lack of willingness to consider the unique experiences of other groups if it violated their own base idea of what was common sense. The new atheist community started to decline for a variety of reasons, including people just straight up losing interest, and a lot of these bloggers started to blame the contemporaneous rise of feminist discourse with the decline of new atheist discourse. To them, people like Rebecca Watson were single-handedly responsible for tearing the community apart. I think the fact that events like that already primed this community to view any feminist woman making any kind of suggestion that men consider previously unexamined aspects of their behavior as unreasonable and ridiculous, mixed with the general culture of dunking on arguments that seem unreasonable and ridiculous, really contributed to large swaths of the skeptic community turning to anti-SJW politics. If y'all watched my Not Like Other Girls video, you already know this, but I myself was one of those people. I was really into the skeptic community and was a big fan of watching dumb, bigoted arguments get epically owned with facts and logic, especially because I was really into LGBT+ activism for some reason. And I witnessed a lot of the backlash to that activism coming specifically from Christian fundamentalists. So it was just a lot of fun and very cathartic to just endlessly dunk on those people when they said bad shit. And then people started to share bad arguments about manspreading, where it would be a picture of a guy on a completely empty train car or whatever. And so when I was like 13, 14, I very quickly also started to really oppose SJWs, because that was what people in my social circle were now talking about. I still considered myself a leftist, but I just didn't approve of those extreme feminists who wanted to ban Father's Day, or that one video of the lady with red hair arguing with men's rights activists. She's bad. Time to obsess over this one singular lady with no significant platform or influence for literal years. It took about a year for me to be like, wait, this is pointless, mostly because I started making friends in real life who were feminists, and they were nothing like the fringe edge cases the anti-SJW internet spent ridiculous amounts of time trying to argue with and debunk and treat as broadly representative of the entire community. Still, I had my year of being all like, I'm not a feminist, I'm an egalitarian. I don't want to use the feminist label and align myself with these people. It was so dumb. It's like, girl, look at the people you are aligning yourself with. Come on. Anyway, my point is, I too have a history on the anti-SJW side of things, so I can confirm that sick dunks on random posts online that seem nonsensical or bad make up a significant proportion of the community. Even just looking through old YouTube channels at the time, like Thunderfoot or the army of folks with icons of household objects but with angry faces and crossed arms, there was very little like making one's own positive arguments about the nature of the world or how politics should be conducted. It was like, here's why Anita Sarkeesian said a bad thing. Here's why the redheaded feminist lady said a bad thing. Here's why Anita Sarkeesian said a bad thing. Here's why this one random university said a bad thing. Here's why Anita Sarkeesian said a bad thing. Here's why Milo Stewart said a bad thing. Here's why Anita Sarkeesian said a bad thing. Like, fucking hell. And nowhere is this more obvious than on r/Tumblr in action, which besides that happened, the fake story subreddit, is where McLeod posted the majority of his doctored screenshots. A lot of people who left the anti-SJW community after it took a much more evidently hard right turn, usually around either Gamergate or the 2016 election, will repeat a similar line. Something along the lines of, like, yeah, those communities were fine and fun when they were just making fun of stuff like manspreading and whatnot, but then it became something a lot more sinister. It sucks that it turned into something so dark when it used to be so chill and reasonable. But, like, did it? I think McLeod's contingent of made-up posts that are supposedly from an army of hysterical, lying social justice warriors tells us about more than just this one guy. I think McLeod and all the Oppa homeless-style adjacent tales are rather a broader case study into how these communities operated and, in many cases, continue to operate. After seeing McLeod's posts, I decided to check out Tumblr in action for the first time in probably about 9 years. I went to look at some of the top posts, and it was very interesting to me what the community fixated upon. The top post of all time there was from someone saying, if you are white, you can't speak Spanish, and then our rational savior steps in to remind us that Spain exists. The comments are mainly people pointing out other countries that have white people who speak Spanish, as well as anger about how many people seem to legitimately believe this. But, like, do they? I decided to track down the original post that tens of thousands of people were getting so outraged about, and this one is actually a real post. The blog that made it deactivated 3 years ago. So I went through a whole bunch of the notes, and literally not a singular person is agreeing with the post. It's a whole bunch of people dunking on them. I did not find a single person in agreement after scrolling through literally hundreds of notes on the original post. But what I did find were some old screenshots from the blog, including this blatantly anti-Semitic post here, as well as a section where they misgender a trans person who responds to them, as well as an addition where they said, if you're Spanish, you can't speak Spanish. So this person is 1, clearly trolling, 2, receiving absolutely zero widespread support from Tumblr SJWs, and 3, a conservative. This is a troll post designed to get people riled up about SJWs. It was never a serious threat, nor was anyone ever seriously claiming white people should not be allowed to speak Spanish. Almost like it follows the exact same MO as the Mechamu stuff. Here's another fake, very deep-fried post at the top of Tumblr in action where a non-binary person tells everyone they're non-binary and the whole restaurant begins to clap. Everyone was talking about how obviously fake the post was, so I looked into finding it, and shockingly, it's not a real Tumblr post. No one ever actually made this post. See, one of the main facets of anti-SJW Tumblr was the creation of troll blogs that were specifically made to mock and discredit social justice people. The most memorable example that I can think of was this post here where someone who is plantkin claims that owning plants is slavery and kidnapping, and tens of thousands of people lose their shit over how they can't tell anything is real anymore. It's like, are you serious? You're genuinely that incapable of identifying a troll? This is not something to brag about. It came from a blog called Carrion Flowerkin, who claimed to be every single sexuality and also said they were a Republican and trans fat, which is not a thing except in food. Like, that's fake. That's a troll. They literally tell you that they're a Republican. And these posts would get tens of thousands of upvotes on Tumblr in action and would get dunking videos from people seriously invested in proving the lie to you. And if you pointed out that they were fake, they'd be like, well, it's still telling that someone could believe it. The fact that I was duped actually makes me more correct, actually. And it's like, yes, you believed this troll blog because you spent years in an insular community. You get duped by troll blogs into hating other people, so you make troll blogs about those people, and you all dupe yourselves into believing these troll blogs until you're getting high off of outrage that you yourself have created like a delicate yet self-sustaining ecosystem. That's not to say none of the posts on Tumblr in action were ever real. There are real posts, even if for the most part they're literally from random nobodies who never got any kind of influence and aren't supported by the mass social movements that these users claim they are. And there are even some genuine real posts that got some sort of real reach, rare as they are. I'm not going to go as far as to claim that the entire community was centered entirely around fake content. That said, even the real content on there seems to follow a trend of mostly being from random accounts that aren't trying to seriously politically organize and are met with almost universal backlash. I looked through a bunch of the other top posts and found essentially no examples of actual prominent SJWs that posed any serious cultural threat to people. The next top 5 posts, in order, included a random account with 63 followers telling the Wendy's Twitter not to assume anyone's gender, and then Wendy's says, "We're all dudes." This person had no social influence and also didn't seem to be involved in the social justice sphere, just following a bunch of sports accounts. Also, they used a lot of slurs. They were clearly not an SJW, especially not a prominent one with any kind of reach or influence. A random nobody on Facebook saying they looked thinner in one mirror than another. This is hard to verify as true or false because private Facebook post, but either way, this is a random nobody, and this post had no widespread reach or support, nor was it really any kind of social activism trying to organize people from any activists that we know of. They were just complaining that they didn't look skinny in an H&M mirror and that they thought the mirror was warped. This tweet about a guy drinking water and how it meant they hated white people, I tracked down the original tweet, and it was getting massively ratioed, with all kinds of people getting thousands of likes making fun of it. There was no widespread agreement with the post. It reads as almost intentionally ridiculous, and again, isn't making any kind of broad social justice points so much as just some random university student complaining. There definitely isn't at least a broad cultural problem of white people being oppressed or even bullied for drinking water out of milk jugs. And this person, again, a random Twitter nobody, received intensely more backlash than they did support. A poorly written article about how some people have a mental illness that causes them to desperately want to be disabled and often harm themselves in the process. It uses the term transabled, which almost no one actually uses, and it's full of comments making the one joke, and inventing backstories about how the trans community supports this community en masse, even though this is not remotely a widespread thing, and seems to just be a widespread misunderstanding of something extremely rare that has literally nothing to do with trans people. An anonymous message from a singular person saying the original poster is a man, with 300,000 people reblogging it to criticize it. Not only did this anonymous person receive no support here, hundreds of thousands of people on Tumblr are condemning them. I have no idea if this is a real anon or that they just sent themselves that message, but what's more relevant is that this clearly isn't an idea that's taken seriously even on Tumblr, and yet it's being used largely as evidence of a widespread cultural issue on Tumblr. I could read off every single top post from this subreddit one by one, but the consistent theme in all of them is that the posts are generally either completely fake troll bait, misinterpreted, or they're from random nobodies who are most times anonymous blogs on the internet with no verified reach or proof that they were ever even real people at all. There are some real posts with an actual reach, mostly from news sources like Vice running articles about random pop social justice concepts, but for the most part, all the top posts on subreddits like this are random Facebook comments, random nobodies on Twitter who aren't doing any kind of serious political organizing, and trolls. A lot of extremely obvious trolls. And that matters because, like I said earlier, it creates a straight up self-sustaining ecosystem of this kind of content. Often, people in anti-fake post communities were so desperate to mock fake posts that they missed obvious jokes. It'd be like if someone was like, a horse walked into a bar and someone tried to fact check it. I don't think a horse really walked into a bar because that would have been a health code violation. You're lying for attention. Like, take this post. It's very obviously a joke, and yet here's 2,000 people mocking the original poster for being a liar. And this gets much worse when not only are people desperate to dunk on the liar, but they're also constantly being bombarded with content to mock that reinforces their existing biases against marginalized groups. It might seem ironic because the roots of this community largely was the skeptic community, which was ostensibly based around being, skeptical of things. Yet these people seem to accept without question that there's genuinely a plague of fat women making up stories about evil nursery rhymes or other kin who are going to call you a kidnapper for having a houseplant. But honestly, I think that's going about things the wrong way. I think it's the very fact that Tumblr in action and anti-social justice YouTubers have their roots in the skeptic community that this was able to happen. This is a community based largely around sick dunks and making the enemy look bad, instinctively responding to anything new or suspicious with extreme skepticism of deception. That impulse isn't always bad when it comes to responding to pseudoscience or bigotry. But as the aesthetic basis for an entire community, it means that when they see something like Oppa homeless style, the instinct is, to dunk on it. To pinpoint every obviously fake thing in the story and bring it back to an internal community that exists entirely to do this. God, I have said dunk so much in this video. I really want Dunkaroos, and I don't think they exist anymore, and it's killing me. That's not to say people never made up real fake posts about owning bigots with facts and logic, or that no one has ever lied about experiencing bigotry ever in any context. We know from that earlier section that fake content coming from naive kids was Tumblr's bread and butter for a while. But the backlash culture that sprung up from that was disproportionate to the real problem of made-up nonsense on Tumblr. And the fact that folks started making up fake liars just to call them out for being fake liars is indicative of that. But okay, why am I talking about this at all? The anti-SJW community as it existed on Reddit seems more or less dead now, as people either got pushed far more right than the "we're all about simple logic and reason" mantra of the community purported to be, or realized the whole thing was a sham and left entirely. Posts on Tumblr in action get a few hundred to a few thousand upvotes now, and it's mostly random screenshots of Facebook posts, blatantly fake posts, or screenshots that are literally a decade old. This post is literally from 2011, like, yeah, you really owned them. So why bring up this community now? Well, besides the fact that the recent uncovering of Oppa homeless style as this fake account got me interested again, I'm not convinced the problem entirely went away with the death of the anti-SJW community. Let me explain. The downfall of communities like Tumblr in Action seems to have coincided with the rise in a bunch of other communities that turn out to have a very similar MO despite ostensibly different purposes. While Tumblr's base growing up and half the users abandoning the website means less of it comes from Tumblr, the new base for blatantly made up content on the internet seems to be subreddits like Am I the Asshole and Relationships. Am I the Asshole initially began as a place where you could post your disagreements with people in your life and have strangers judge whether you're actually the asshole in this situation. It was kind of a neat way to resolve conflicts. Cracks quickly began to show though, because it turns out that when someone is posting about a disagreement they had, they're only gonna represent it from their own perspective. Very quickly, almost no one was ever getting judged as the asshole because, well, they only ever told their own side of the story. And as the subreddit got bigger and bigger, much like MLIA of days of yore, it went from mundane conflicts to absolutely buck-wild bullshit. First, there were obvious validation posts. Someone acted in a way that literally no person could ever interpret as making them the asshole, and they'd share their story just to get internet points and hear people talk about how great they were. Then there was a rise in clickbait content, validation posts with intentionally misleading titles to get the most engagement. Like the title would be, "Am I the asshole for punching an old woman in the face?" and the story would be about how the old woman was robbing a bank and our protagonist saved people. A lot of this stuff just amounts to bad fanfiction, which is a shame because at least my bad fanfiction includes an army of identical Onceler clones with a suspicious amount of body strength who bring me to a little cabin in rural Thneedville where they all take turns. Moderators eventually removed the rule against validation posts, and while there's a guideline not to submit made-up content, everyone very clearly does, and it virtually never gets removed. Not only that, but often people doubting someone's story will get their own comment removed just for casting doubt on it. This seems fairly harmless at first, like yeah, okay, people are making up dumb interpersonal bullshit for internet points. Everyone kind of knows on some level that it's a creative fiction site. But the issue is that when you look deeper into the kind of content on Am I the Asshole, it starts to look really reminiscent of the Mechamu stuff. Multiple times a day, there are these blatantly faked Am I the Asshole posts centered around a trans person doing something unreasonable. A trans person told me to change my name because they used to be named that. That one got almost 2,000 upvotes with loads of comments saying stuff like, "This is why everyone thinks trans people are unreasonable." I mean, technically that's true. A lot of people do think trans people are unreasonable because folks make up lies about them. There are constant trans posts about how someone tried to trans you or a trans person stole all your money and then called you transphobic for asking for your money back, and they're all very clearly blatantly fake to anyone who's met a trans person, but they're clearly not seen as blatantly fake to the tens of thousands of people who fall for them every single time. There's also very similar content when it comes to posts mentioning autism on the subreddit. The unreasonable autistic villain is a common trope on Am I the Asshole posts. It turns out the subreddit is essentially reinventing the stereotype of the hysterical minority from Tumblr in Action, and everyone once again is falling for it. Fake posts about these groups create insular communities of people who distrust those groups and thus create fake posts about those groups, which create insular communities of people who distrust those groups, and the cycle continues on and on and on until the image people have in their head of a trans person or a person of color or a fat woman or an autistic person don't even remotely resemble anyone's real life experiences. And as we saw from the rise in the anti-social justice warrior community, that can get really bad. What started out as a fun post that perfectly captured the wackier elements of Tumblr fake story culture led into a fairly dark rabbit hole of fake content explicitly created to stir up backlash against various marginalized groups. This backlash often took the form of the creation of even more fake posts until the entire community was an Ouroboros of vitriol against an almost entirely fabricated enemy with real marginalized communities directly in its line of fire. These posts are often treated as fairly harmless when they don't go beyond Oppa homeless style-esque stuff. I mean, it became a meme on Tumblr for a reason, mostly because it was, you know, silly and goofy and fun. But as we've seen from the stuff on places like Am I the Asshole turning into another here's the crazy SJW I encountered today forum, it's very easy for these communities to turn quite sinister, especially when they prey on pre-existing biases people might have against marginalized groups. A lot of that early Tumblr content that was a bizarre simulacrum of adult life managed to get popular because it was made and spread by kids who didn't know what adult life really looked like. And similarly, Tumblr in Action and Am I the Asshole seem not to be representing any actual existing issue that most people will ever typically encounter outside the internet, but rather a community-generated simulacrum of what they think a disabled person or a trans person is. Reality is irrelevant because they aren't engaging with reality. They're engaging with a villain of their own creation, and they reward each other by creating more of it. I don't have a perfect solution to this issue, but I do think folks should exercise critical thinking in general when it comes to the communities they participate in. If the majority of the stuff you're reading about any given group comes not from a primary identifiable source from the group itself, but from a secondhand story or a censored screenshot of a random Facebook nobody, it might be worth stepping outside of it. I also think a lot of this responsibility is on people who create these communities to fucking moderate them. Reddit communities, at least ostensibly, have what Tumblr never did: actual teams of moderators who can remove fake content designed to stir up backlash. If you run a community dedicated to calling out fake posts, it might be worth fact-checking which ones are real fake posts and which ones are fake posts, you get it. Fake posts that were never actually real. And if you run a subreddit you insist isn't for creative writing, use some common sense and don't let it be used for creative writing. Oppa Homeless Style may not have ever been a real post, nor were any of the other posts MechaMew created, but the culture that sprung up around this kind of content very much was real. I wouldn't be surprised if further investigations into places like r/thathappened revealed a lot of either people calling out obvious jokes, or screenshots of fake posts it's suspiciously impossible to find elsewhere. When that happens, it's worth interrogating what preconceived beliefs those posts might try to reinforce, even subtly. Anyway, I'm exhausted from all these terrible, terrible stories. Back to my Onceler fanfiction, at least that one has enemies to lovers. If you're interested in exploring future content about internet culture, you can find lots of interesting documentaries on CuriosityStream, my sponsor for this video. CuriosityStream is a really cool streaming service full of fascinating documentaries on science, history, technology, and society that addresses our desire to learn. Documentaries like the Curious Minds series on social networking explore its history in really fun and interesting ways, exploring topics like the rise and fall of AOL. It's really interesting stuff, and you can watch that and a lot more on CuriosityStream. Not only that, but if you want to watch a lot of cool educational and entertaining content and support me and lots of other creators, CuriosityStream has partnered with Nebula to help me and tons of others make exclusive content only available on Nebula. Nebula is a collaborative platform by me and many other creators like Cat Black, Tierzoo, PhilosophyTube, and many others where you can stream high-quality content, some of which you can only find on Nebula. Nebula is a really great way to help support creators because it lets us create content that might not be best suited for YouTube because of copyright, monetization, or other reasons. So for example, when you sign up for Nebula, you not only get to watch my YouTube videos early, you also get to watch Nebula originals like my exclusive video Debater Theater. In Debater Theater, I talk about how to better use arguments to persuade others with lots of cool examples like how people use debating skills in movies, the news, and even award acceptance speeches. Debating is all about recognizing other people's arguments, noticing when there's verbal sleight of hand designed to persuade people, and learning to counter those arguments, which makes it a great exercise in critical thinking and makes you better at recognizing those tricks in the wild. This video was, of course, about critical thinking and how easy it is for people to deceive others, and in my opinion, getting a primer on debating skills is a really cool and useful way to notice when and where it's happening and work to combat it. When you sign up for CuriosityStream, you also get your subscription to Nebula included. You can get unlimited access to both services for just $2.99 a month when you sign up using my code. Just head to curiositystream.com/SarahZ and use my code SarahZ at signup. That's curiositystream.com/SarahZ. On top of a special thank you to all my patrons, I'd like to specially thank Vocalegra NB, Eleanor Bart, and Sabrina Savale for joining my $20 plus tier. Welcome.